I'm 24, and I think one of the most damaging things you can hear in a relationship is not, I don't love you. It's, I was just joking, because that phrase can cover 1,000 small cuts. And when the person saying it knows you hate those cuts, keeps making them anyway, and then acts wounded the first time you stop smiling through it, you start realizing the issue was never humor, it was power. It was the quiet assumption that one person gets to test the edges of your dignity while the other one is expected to stay soft, understanding, and infinitely forgiving. I didn't realize how much resentment I had built up until the night she started crying in the dark and told me she wasn't sure who she would be if she'd never met me. That was the moment the whole relationship split open, not because she had one complicated thought, because suddenly every joke, every double standard, and every fight I had tried to smooth over rearranged itself into something I could finally see. Her name is Marin. She's 23. We had been together for just over 6 years. We got together young enough that most people in our lives treated us like a sweet statistic, high school sweethearts, the couple who somehow made it, the pair that seemed inevitable. And for a long time, I liked that story. I liked being the guy who had found his person early, the guy who did not have to play games, chase chaos, or wonder what his future was supposed to look like. It felt grounding, romantic even, like we had somehow slipped past the mess and landed straight in the meaningful part. When I left for university abroad, that story started taking on more strain. Long distance does not always kill relationships quickly. Sometimes it stretches them thin enough that every weakness becomes translucent. We saw each other when we could, long weekends, holiday breaks, video calls, a month together here and there if schedules aligned. We kept saying it was temporary. We kept saying we were building towards something, and I believed that because I needed to believe that the sacrifice meant something more than habit. The truth is, the first signs were not dramatic, they were jokes. Marin had this habit of saying things that sounded playful if you listened from the next room, but landed differently when you were the person they were aimed at. She would say stuff like, if you proposed right now, I'd say no. Or, you're lucky I'm emotionally attached because this relationship is a lot. Or, sometimes I wonder how I ended up with someone so annoying. Then she'd laugh. And if I didn't laugh fast enough, she'd say I was too sensitive. At first, I brushed it off. Then I brought it up gently, then not so gently, then so many times that I lost count. Every single time she apologized. And every single time, a few days or a week later, it would start again. That is one of the most exhausting parts of long term emotional erosion, not the cruelty itself. The endless cycle of explaining why it hurt, being told it was understood, and then watching the exact same behavior return like your pain had an expiration date. The deeper issue was that the jokes were never equal opportunity. Marin herself admitted this once during an argument, almost casually. She said, yeah, if you said that to me, I'd probably break up with you. Imagine hearing that and still trying to convince yourself things are normal, because that sentence means, I understand the standard. I just do not intend to live under it with you. By the second year of long distance, the comments got more personal, not just relationship jokes anymore. Me jokes, my habits, my appearance, my routines, the tiny details of myself that should have been safe in the hands of someone who supposedly loved me. The thing that really got under my skin was my facial hair. About a year earlier, she had told me she liked the way my mustache looked, so I kept it. Then one day, out of nowhere, she told me it looked ugly and I should shave it off. I thought she was messing with me. She wasn't. She said, I'm the one kissing you, so I should get a say in what's on your face. That line stayed with me because of how confidently she said it. Not embarrassed, not teasing, like it made perfect sense. And what made me angrier than the comment itself was that I knew with total certainty that if I had ever said anything parallel about her body, her appearance, her weight, her clothes, her anything, it would not have been received as playful honesty. It would have been evidence that I was controlling, shallow, or cruel. And the worst part, she knew that too. I tried to stay calm for weeks. That detail matters to me because by the time this story reaches the point where I say something I regret, I need it understood that I did not open there. I started with, hey, this kind of joke doesn't sit right with me. Then I really need you to stop saying things like that. Then I'm serious. This is becoming a pattern. Then why is it fine when you say it, but not if I even hypothetically mirror it back? Every version of that conversation ended the same way. She would apologize. She would say she did not mean anything by it. She would say I was over focusing on wording. Then somehow I would end up comforting her because the discussion itself made her feel like a bad girlfriend, which is an amazing trick, really. Make someone absorb the insult, then absorb the repair too. The breaking point on my side came during a call when she made another comment about my face and laughed when I looked annoyed. I finally snapped and gave an example I am not proud of. I said something along the lines of, okay, then by that logic, if I told you to lose weight because I'm the one dating you, would that be okay too? I said immediately that I was giving an example, not insulting her. I still should not have used that example. I know that. But the reason I did is important. It was the only comparison harsh enough to cut through the absurdity of what she had been normalizing. She hung up almost immediately. And then, predictably, the entire moral spotlight moved, not to the months of comments that got us there, not to the admitted double standard, not to the fact that I had been trying to handle this carefully for weeks, just to me, my tone, my example, my failure to remain infinitely patient while being needled. That was the first time I started thinking, maybe the problem isn't that she doesn't understand. Maybe the problem is that understanding never obligated her to stop. Still, we stayed together. That is the part people always judge from the outside. And honestly, fair enough. But history has gravity. 6 years has gravity. The version of your future you have already memorized has gravity. Also, Marin could be lovely, funny, supportive, warm. There were still nights where we laughed until it felt like all the fights must have been some weird distortion. There were still moments where she talked about us getting an apartment one day, maybe a dog, maybe kids later, maybe a life that looked settled and earned and real. And because I loved her, I kept choosing the version of her that made staying make sense. That is how people remain in things long after the evidence changes. Not because they are blind, because they are loyal to a version of reality that once felt true. Then came the weekend, everything shifted. I was at her place. We'd spent the day together, eaten takeout, watched something stupid, and for once the atmosphere felt easy. We started having sex. Nothing unusual, nothing tense, nothing that felt like the setup for a crisis. Then suddenly she told me to stop. At first, I thought maybe I had hurt her accidentally, but the room was completely dark. And after I asked what was wrong, she just said, I'm crying. I remember freezing. Not externally, maybe, but in that way, your body goes still because your mind has no immediate category for what is happening. I asked what happened. I asked if she was okay. I asked if I had done something wrong. And she kept saying, no, 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 until eventually she started talking. She said she had gotten overwhelmed with guilt. Guilt about what? That was my first question. Then she said she sometimes wondered who she would have been if we had never met. She said sometimes she thought, should we even be together? She kept saying she loved me, kept saying she still imagined a future with me, kept saying she could not explain it properly, that it was not as simple as wanting to break up, that she felt terrible for even having the thoughts, that she had been scared to tell me because she knew I would overthink it. And the brutal thing about hearing something like that in the dark is that your brain supplies all the missing images, every joke, every dismissal, every insult wrapped in laughter, every double standard, every apology that dissolved on contact with time. Suddenly, all of it had a new shape, not random friction, not two people struggling, a person half inside the relationship asking the one fully inside it to keep acting like certainty still existed. I comforted her anyway. Of course I did. That is what shocked me afterward, not just what she said, that I still slipped automatically into caretaking mode, even while something in me was quietly breaking. We reassured each other, eventually slept, or at least lay still long enough to imitate sleep. Then the next morning, she left for a family vacation, which meant I had to sit with all of it alone. No real conversation, no closure, just me, my thoughts, and the absolute hell of trying to decode what your partner means when they tell you they love you, want a future, and still sometimes wonder if the relationship should exist at all. The more I thought about it, the worse it got, because I realized the crying itself was not the only issue. The issue was that there had been cracks for a long time, and instead of dealing with them honestly, we had both been using different forms of avoidance. Mine looked like patience, hers looked like jokes, deflection, and the occasional emotional bomb dropped at the worst possible moment. And underneath all of it was a truth I had not wanted to name. I was no longer convinced she treated me with the same care she expected from me. That kind of asymmetry poisons everything. Even good memories start feeling unstable under it. When she came back from the trip, we finally talked. Really talked. I told her that what happened that night had changed how I saw the relationship. I said I was less shaken by the existence of doubts than by the fact that they seemed to coexist so comfortably with a pattern of comments that chipped away at me. I said I was tired of being told harsh things were jokes and tired of pretending her reactions would not be completely different if our roles were reversed. She cried again, then apologized again, then said she did not realize how bad it had gotten. Then, and this is the part that almost made me laugh from pure exhaustion, she asked whether I still liked her, as if we were 15, as if 6 years together and one emotional implosion in the middle of sex could be translated into whether I still liked her. I said yes, but that I did not feel safe in the relationship in the same way anymore. She got defensive instantly, not screaming, worse, fast, sharp, panicked. She said I was making one bad night into a whole identity. She said I was weaponizing her vulnerability. She said her crying had been about existential fear, not about me being inadequate. She said the comments were jokes, and I knew her intentions. She said she was tired of feeling like the villain every time she messed up. And there it was again, the same old cycle, just in a more dramatic wrapper. I bring hurt. She brings pain about my hurt. I become caretaker of both. Nothing changes. Update one, we tried to keep going for another 3 weeks. I know, I know, but 6 years is hard to bury quickly. For a while, she was gentler, more careful, no jokes, more check ins, more reassurance. And I think part of her genuinely was trying. The problem was that once I saw the structure, I could not unsee it. Every affectionate moment started sharing space with doubt. Every compliment felt shadowed by the memory of some earlier remark. Every discussion about the future now had this quiet voice under it asking, is she talking about a life she wants or a life she feels guilty leaving? That is no way to stay close to someone. Not really. Update 2. We broke up. It was mutual in the technical sense and devastating in the real one. She said she loved me, but needed to figure out who she was outside a relationship that had started before either of us fully knew ourselves. I said I loved her too, but I could not keep absorbing jokes, double standards, and uncertainty while calling it intimacy. She asked if I thought she was toxic. I said I thought we had both become too attached to the version of us that existed in our heads, and that in real life, I felt like I had been tolerating too much disrespect because I was terrified of what 6 years becoming nothing would mean. She cried. I cried. Then we spent almost an hour trying to say goodbye in increasingly less convincing ways. There is no dignified ending to some relationships, just the shared realization that love was real and still not enough to make the dynamic healthy. Update 3. It has been a month. I still miss her in stupid ambush style ways. Songs, weekend routines, the instinct to send her a photo when something funny happens, the phantom shape of a future I spent most of my adult life assuming would exist. But I also feel lighter, and I hate how true that is. Lighter because nobody is taking little bites out of me and calling them jokes. Lighter because I no longer have to negotiate my own hurt into a tone that won't trigger someone else's guilt spiral. Lighter because I'm starting to understand that loyalty without mutual care becomes self erasure really fast. And I think the sentence I'm keeping from all of this is this: if someone can only tell the truth about their doubts after they've already made you carry the weight of them, that's not honesty. That's delayed fallout. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt me. Maybe she loved me as much as she could. Maybe I loved her in a way that made me ignore too many warnings because I needed the future to stay intact. All of that can be true. But what is also true is that I spent too long bleeding from cuts I was told were harmless. And once you see that clearly, staying starts to feel less like devotion and more like volunteering for the next wound.